The second I said it, I wanted to disappear into the couch cushions and never come back. It wasn't even a clever joke. It was the kind of thing that falls out of your mouth before your brain has any chance to catch it. The kind you immediately try to laugh off, but the room just gets quieter instead of louder. And in that silence, everything changed. My name is Dominic Farrell, and 7 years ago, I said the most embarrassing thing I have ever said out loud in my entire life. I said it to my best friend. I said it about his older sister, and I said it while she was standing close enough to hear every word. Before I get into it, if this is your first time on Mercy Stories, take a second to like the video and subscribe. We share real stories about real people navigating moments life never warned them about. Now let me take you back to Bridgeport, Connecticut. The fall I was 24 years old, and the night one stupid sentence rewired the entire direction of my future. I had known Terrence Obi since the 7th grade. We met in gym class when we were both picked last for the same basketball team. And somehow that shared humiliation turned into a 10-year friendship. Terrence was the kind of guy who made everything feel less serious. Not because he didn't care, but because he had this gift for finding the absurd angle in whatever was going wrong. He could make you laugh during a power outage, during a car breakdown, during the worst week of your semester. Growing up, his house was the house everyone ended up at on Friday nights, partly because his mom always had food, and partly because nobody wanted the night to end. I worked at a logistics company in downtown Bridgeport, moving boxes around a warehouse and doing data entry 3 evenings a week. It wasn't glamorous. I was 24 with a 2-year degree in business administration that I hadn't figured out how to use yet, living in a 1-bedroom apartment with a mattress on the floor and a second-hand couch that listed slightly to the left. Terrence was in a similar situation, working at a mechanic's shop off Route 1, saving money to eventually open something of his own. We were both figuring it out, in the slow, unglamorous way that most people in their mid-20s are figuring it out. Terrence's family lived in the same house he'd grown up in, a split level in the Black Rock neighborhood with a small backyard and a front porch that his mom had decorated with a string of solar lights that stayed up year-round. His mother, Ruth Obi, was a deeply warm woman who worked as a medical billing specialist for a hospital network and had raised Terrence and his older sister essentially on her own after his father moved back to Nigeria when they were both young. She was organized and firm and kind in that matter-of-fact way where she didn't have to tell you she cared because it was obvious in everything she did. And then there was Claudette. Claudette Obi was 29 when I was 24. She had moved back home about 8 months before all of this happened after a long-term relationship ended, and she decided to leave Boston, where she'd been working as a graphic designer at a mid-size branding agency. She'd taken a remote contract position with a company out of Austin and was using the time at home to reset, figure out her next move, and save money. She was smart and a little guarded, the kind of person who observed a room before deciding how much of herself to give to it. She had this dry, unhurried wit that she didn't deploy often, but when she did, it landed exactly right. I'd known Claudette in passing for years, the way you know your best friend's older sibling, someone who's around sometime, someone who offers you a plate of food at family gathering, someone you vaguely look up to without ever really thinking about it too hard. She'd always been cordial but a little distant, which I figured was just how she was with Terrence's friends. I did not think about her beyond that. At least, I told myself I didn't. It was a Saturday night in late October. Terrence and I had spent the afternoon watching college football at his place, and by evening a few other people had drifted over. His cousin Marcus, no relation to the list, just a common name, had brought chips. Someone had ordered a pizza. It was one of those low-key weekends where the plan is to do nothing, and somehow it still feels like the right call. Claudette had been in the living room with us on and off throughout the day. She'd been working on her laptop at the dining table for most of the afternoon, only half tuning into the game, occasionally making a dry comment about a play that made everyone laugh and then going back to her screen. Around 7, she went upstairs to take a shower and change. When she came back down, I wasn't prepared for it. She was wearing a dark green dress, simple, just above the knee, her hair down, which I hadn't seen before, and she was clearly getting ready to head out somewhere. She said a quick hello to the room, grabbed her jacket off the hook by the door, and mentioned she was meeting some friends from her old job who were passing through town. I watched her walk through the room, and something in my chest did a thing that I absolutely did not want it to do. Terrence was beside me, reaching for the last slice of pizza, and before I had any control over the situation, I turned to him and said quietly, or what I thought was quietly, "Man, your sister is easily the most attractive woman I think I've ever been around." The room went quiet. Terrence froze with the pizza slice halfway to his mouth, and then I heard Claudette's voice, completely calm, from near the front door. I heard that. I felt the blood leave my face. She was standing with her jacket already on, her bag over her shoulder, and she was looking at me with this expression I couldn't classify. Not angry, not flattered exactly, just assessing. Like she was deciding in real time what to do with the information. Then she tilted her head slightly and said, "Thank you, Dominic. That was a nice thing to say," and she left. The door clicked shut. I sat there feeling like I'd been turned inside out. Terrence slowly set the pizza down. He looked at me for a long moment. "Bro," he finally said. "I know," I said. "What was that?" "I know. About my sister, Terrence. I know." He didn't say anything else for the rest of the night. Not really. He was civil, but there was a flatness to him that I recognized. It was the flatness of someone who doesn't know yet how to feel about something and is choosing not to perform a feeling in the meantime. I drove home at midnight feeling like an idiot. I replayed the scene 17 times in the parking lot of my apartment building before I finally made myself go inside. What I expected to happen was that the whole thing would quietly evaporate, that Claudette would file it under awkward thing Terrence's friend said, and everyone would move on. What actually happened was almost worse than that, because nothing happened. At least for a while. The following week I texted Terrence to see if we were good. He said, "Yeah, we were good. We met up for lunch that Thursday, and he didn't bring it up. I didn't bring it up. We talked about his job, about a car he was thinking of buying, about a new restaurant on Fairfield Avenue we kept meaning to try. But there was something slightly different in the air between us, a thin layer of something unspoken, and I didn't know how to peel it back without making everything worse. I stopped going to his family's house for a while, not dramatically, not with any announcement, just quietly less. I said I was busy when I was invited for Thanksgiving, which wasn't entirely untrue. I did work a half shift that morning, but mostly I didn't trust myself to walk into that house and act normal. Then, about 3 weeks after the night at the door, I got a text from a number I didn't have saved. "Hey, it's Claudette. Terrence gave me your number. Is that okay?" I stared at my phone for 4 full minutes before I typed back, "Yeah, of course. Everything good? Yeah, I just wanted to say I wasn't weirded out by what you said. I thought it was kind of sweet, actually. Even if you didn't mean for me to hear it." I didn't know how to respond to that. I typed and deleted 7 different responses. I finally sent, "I'm really sorry if it was out of line." She replied almost immediately. It wasn't out of line, it was honest. I just wasn't expecting honesty from one of Terrence's friends. I didn't know what that meant. I wasn't sure she expected me to know, but I thought about it for the rest of the day. We texted on and off over the next 2 weeks. Nothing significant. She asked me once what I thought of a color palette she was working on for a client and sent me 3 different options. I picked the middle one. She said her client picked the same one, which she said meant either we both had good taste or we were both wrong. I asked her what the client did, and she said they sold artisanal hot sauce out of a shed in Vermont, which made me laugh out loud alone in my apartment at 11 at night. It was casual, easy in a way I hadn't expected. Then one evening I was walking through the Stop and Shop on Black Rock Turnpike, and she happened to be there, buying exactly 2 things, a bag of rice and a bottle of dish soap. We stood in the cereal aisle for 40 minutes talking. I don't even remember exactly what about. Her work, my job, what Bridgeport was like compared to Boston, whether it was weird being back home as an adult. But when I finally said I should probably go because my frozen stuff was melting, she smiled and said, "We should do this without the grocery carts next time." I drove home not breathing right. I also had the distinct and terrible feeling that I was standing at the edge of something I had no business standing at the edge of. Terrence was one of the most important people in my life. I didn't have a huge social world. I hadn't grown up with a big family. My parents had divorced when I was 9, my mom had moved to Phoenix, and the friendships I'd built in Connecticut were mostly through Terrence. Losing him was not an abstract risk. It was a real one. I thought about pulling back from whatever this was becoming. I almost did, but I also kept thinking about the grocery store, about how the conversation had felt like the most natural 40 minutes I'd had in years. And I didn't know what to do with that. About a month after the grocery store, I did something that took me 2 weeks to build up to. I asked Terrence if we could meet up, just the two of us, somewhere we could actually talk. He said sure, a little warily, and we met at a diner on Iranistan Avenue on a Tuesday night after his shift. I didn't know how to start, so I started in the middle. I told him that something had been on my mind since October, that I knew it was a strange situation, that I valued what we had more than I knew how to say. And then I told him that I thought I might have real feelings for Claudette, and that I needed him to know that before it went any further, whatever further even meant. He didn't say anything for a long time. He looked out the window. He drank his coffee. He picked up his fork and put it down again without touching his food. When he finally looked at me, said, "How long?" I wasn't sure how to answer. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe longer than I realized." He nodded slowly, like he was absorbing something heavy. "She's not some girl you dated in college," he said. "She's my sister. She's already been through a lot, I know. If you do something stupid, I can't just let that go. I'm not asking you to." "Then what are you asking?" And I said the only honest thing I had. "I'm asking you to know. That's it. I'm not asking for permission. I'm not asking you to be happy about it. I just didn't want to do anything without you knowing." He was quiet again for a long time. Then he threw some money on the table, put on his jacket, and said he needed to think. He didn't call me for 6 weeks. Those 6 weeks were the loneliest I'd felt in a long time. I went to work, came home, watched TV, went to sleep. I didn't reach out to Claudette. I didn't want to make things worse for Terrence, and honestly, I wasn't sure where I stood with her anyway. Everything had been so tentative, so early. I told myself maybe I'd misread the whole thing. Maybe the grocery store was just the grocery store. I kept my phone with me all the time anyway. I thought a lot about what it meant to care about someone who existed inside a friendship you'd built your adult life around. I thought about how sometimes the thing you want and the thing you're allowed to want don't line up cleanly. I thought about whether some lines are better left alone. But I also thought about Claudette telling me my honesty surprised her. I kept coming back to that. The way she said it, like she'd been waiting a long time for something to be uncomplicated. Then one evening in March, Terrence called. He didn't say hello. He just started talking in this low, measured voice, like he'd rehearsed it a little. He said he'd been thinking a lot. He said he'd watched his sister for the last year, since she came home, since the end of her relationship in Boston, and he'd noticed things he hadn't wanted to look at directly. How quiet she'd gotten. How much time she spent working in her room. How she deflected when anyone asked if she was okay. He said she was his sister and he loved her. And what he wanted for her, more than anything, was for her to feel like herself again. Then he stopped for a second. "I'm not giving you some speech about treating her right," he said. "You know that already. What I'm saying is, don't let this drag out into something weird. If you feel something real, be real about it." I didn't say anything for a moment. "Are you actually okay with this?" I asked. "I don't know if okay is the word," he said, "but I'm not okay with it. Does that make sense?" It did. "Also," he said, with the first trace of his normal voice creeping back in, "if she ends up not being interested, I'm going to enjoy watching you deal with that." I laughed for the first time in weeks. I called Claudette that same night. I told her I'd talked to Terrence. I told her I'd wanted him to know where I was at before I said anything to her, because whatever happened between us, I didn't want it to come at the cost of his trust. And then I asked her, straightforwardly, whether she'd want to have dinner with me sometime. Not as Terrence's friend. Just the two of us. There was a pause. Then she said, "I thought you were never going to ask." I actually laughed at that. Not because it was surprising exactly, but because it was so perfectly her, dry and direct and without any performance. "You could have said something," I said. "I did," she said. "At the front door in October. You just weren't listening." We had our first real date on a Friday night in April. We drove up to New Haven and had dinner at a small Italian place on Chapel Street, one of those narrow restaurants where the tables are close together, and the bread comes immediately, and the lighting is dim enough that everything feels more honest than it would somewhere brighter. We talked for almost 3 hours, not about the weird months between October and now, about everything else, about her design work and what made her choose it, about what it was like growing up and watching her mom hold the family together, about my parents' divorce and what that had done quietly to my sense of what a relationship was supposed to look like, about what we both actually wanted, not in 5 years but now. Soon. It felt like the conversation I hadn't known I was waiting to have with someone. On the drive home, she fell asleep in the passenger seat somewhere around Orange, and I turned the music down and kept driving and thought, very clearly and without any drama, that I wanted more evenings that ended like this. The three of us had an awkward holiday season that first year. I won't pretend otherwise. Thanksgiving at Ruth's house. Terrence and I sitting across from each other at the table with Claudette between us. Ruth watching everything with a calm, unbothered expression that I later found out meant she had already figured out the situation months before anyone told her. She pulled me aside after dinner while we were washing dishes and said, very simply, "My children are the most important things in my life. If you understand that, the rest is easy." I told her I understood it. She handed me a dish towel and that was that. Christmas was easier. By New Year's, Terrence had stopped being weird about it, mostly. He still gave me a look every time Claudette and I walked in somewhere together, but it was no longer a look of discomfort. It was more like the look someone gives when the thing they were worried about turned out to be fine, and they don't quite want to admit it. Claudette and I have been together for 7 years now. We got engaged 2 winters ago at the kitchen table of the apartment we share in East Norwalk. No proposal, just a conversation about what we wanted, and agreeing that we wanted this permanently and deciding together. She designs brand identities for small businesses, and she is genuinely excellent at it. The kind of good where you can see her particular intelligence in everything she makes. I eventually left the logistics company and got a job managing inventory and supply chain operations for a manufacturing company in Shelton, which uses my business degree in the way I always vaguely hoped something would. Terrence was my best man. He gave a speech at the rehearsal dinner that started with him, pretending he hadn't been told the venue address and had accidentally gotten dinner at the wrong restaurant up the street. He kept the real speech very short. He said that watching us had taught him that the people who matter to you don't stop mattering to each other just because it's inconvenient. He said it simply and without a lot of fuss, which is how Terrence says everything he actually means. There are still moments sometimes when Claudette and I are at a family dinner and Terrence says something that cracks the whole room up, and she catches my eye across the table and smiles, and I think about that Saturday in October, the pizza boxes, the door clicking shut, the quiet in the room after she left. I think about how much of your life can hinge on a single careless sentence, not because of what the sentence means, but because of what it reveals about what you want, about who you're paying attention to when you don't mean to be. If you've ever had a moment like that, a moment where something you didn't plan said more than you were ready to say, write the word honest in the comments. Because I think the moments that change us are almost never the ones we prepared for. I said something embarrassing on a couch in October, and it turned out to be the most truthful thing I'd managed to say in years. That's the story. That's all of it. If it landed with you, share it with someone who believes that the best things sometimes start with the worst timing. Like the video, subscribe to Mercy Stories, and we'll be back next week with another one.